we'll start. All right, so let's get started. We are at the 1 o'clock hour. I am Amber Worthington, Deputy Director of Programs and Policy for Fish and Game, and I have with me Lance Hebden, Fisheries Bureau Chief, and Kathleen Trevor, our Deputy Attorney General. For the sake of writing down who we have attending, I'd like to hear online who we have, starting with Dustin and who you are associated with, if you have any association other than just public.
Here we go. Yeah, I'm Dustin Clay. I am the founder of the Idaho Spearfishing Club, and otherwise I'm unaffiliated.
Okay, thank you. We've got an
Yep.
iPhone. I don't have identification. If you could identify yourself, please.
Sorry, I thought I heard my name, but I am having a real hard time hearing you guys.
Oh, okay. Do we have a way to turn the volume up? Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Yes, my name's Osama Muhammad. I'm a lifelong hunter and fisherman from Idaho, currently spearfishing, and yeah, been free diving and spearfishing for probably 6 years now, but have owned a hunting license and fishing license my entire life, minus a couple of years when I lived in Arkansas. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and to try to help make changes to the legislation and rules.
Great, thank you. And can you spell your last name for me, please?
It's Mohamed.
Okay, and are you associated with any club or other association?
No, just group of free divers here in Southwest Idaho.
Okay, great. I think I saw Kyle. You want to identify yourself?
Yeah, Kyle Mackey, the North Idaho Field Rep for the Idaho Wildlife Federation.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Looks like we've got Andy from North Idaho Region 1 office. Is that right, Andy?
That's correct.
Okay. And do we have anybody else on online?
Yeah, we get a bunch.
Oh, we've got a bunch. Okay, so let's see. Starting with John. John, I know you, so I'll identify you. You're with Doppel. Let's see, Chad's Whipperman, is that right?
Yep.
Chad, could you please identify yourself and if
Introduce.
you belong with somebody?
If you're in your personal capacity today.
Thank you, Catherine.
And if you're talking, Chad, we cannot hear you.
Yep, just tuning in.
Okay, and are you in your personal capacity today?
Yep.
Okay.
We got Dustin. We got that one. Jeremy, can you please identify yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Storton. I own Mountain Sea Aquatics. I'm a free diving instructor based here in Meridian in the Boise area. I'm also a spearfisherman, and my goal is to open up spearfishing opportunities and make sure everyone does it well and does it safely.
Great, thank you.
Kyle, Nathan.
Nathan, can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, this is Nathan Price. I'm the president of the Idaho Hunter Education Association, and I'll just be myself for this meeting.
Okay. Spencer, could you identify yourself, please?
Yep, my name's Spencer Wilhelm, just representing myself here. Also a spear fisherman, free diver, and scuba diver.
Okay, great.
I think that's everybody.
Okay, did we miss anybody? If so, speak up now, otherwise we will get moving. Okay, great. So thank you everybody for joining. We are here today in response to a proposal that was filed with the department, which asked the department to pursue rulemaking to consider expanding opportunities for spearfishing. The proposal was specific to take a certain game fish species that the department is actively trying to reduce abundance of to achieve management objectives. We will review the relevant sections of IDAPA 130111, Rules Governing Fish, and present a red line that staff have built covering those sections, which took into consideration the comments we received by public and evaluation of what neighboring states are also allowing for spearfishing. So now we've got everybody from the public represented. I think I'll just make it real quick and turn it over to Lance to pull up the red line so we can start evaluating what he's put forward.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So again, my name's Lance Hebden. I'm the Bureau Chief of Fisheries, and I'm going to be sharing what we have initially worked up. We had to have somewhere to start. And hopefully everybody can see that. Connor, give me a thumbs up if we're good. So as Amber mentioned, part of the process is we have to go through the rules governing fish, which is 130111, and basically establish spearfishing as a definition and a method of take. And so as we've done that, part of what we did, because there's a section which we'll get to in a few minutes that lumps snagging, bow fishing, and spearfishing as illegal methods of take unless otherwise approved by the commission, we had to build these in definitions. And so we're kind of working through this for purposes of this exercise. We split a separate definition for bow fishing, and for what we're talking about today, the definition for spearfishing. And so this is one of the things that we're looking to get input on specifically. And in looking at rules across other states, there's a whole host of ways that states regulate spearfishing and define spearfishing. And I guess I will put this forward for questions in terms of, what do you guys think about this? Take a look at it. Are there things we're missing? Would you like, does this get the point across?
It's very broad, leaves a lot of openings for whether with scuba gear or with the breath hold, manually or mechanically propelled. Could be a little more specific. Kind of is, that's really broad interpretation of it, but it's a good starting point.
And that's what we're looking for.
I do agree with that. A lot of people with me, I do a lot of scuba diving. I've been doing it for quite a few years. I got into spearfishing. We have a lot of people that do free diving or scuba diving around here inside this valley that are getting more into the spearfishing. So by just saying with the diver, just make sure that it's not specific just for one way or the other, for any diver.
And there, yeah, I mean, there are some places that we discussed in North Idaho at the first meeting that there were places that eliminated scuba gear, and I, have not heard from anybody that we want to go that direction.
Okay. With free diving, sometimes I can, I wouldn't say unsafe. That's where we have a couple people here that are even on here that do a lot with free diving. They can teach you proper ways, proper techniques to do free diving. But also, if you look into over there in Oregon and whatnot, with scuba diving gear, it is a safer method for you to do that. You can take your time and be able to get a good shot at, which you can also do while you are free diving. But it does help you out with your lungs, and it is also a safe practice to go fishing. And that's what we're all here for, doing it safely.
Yeah, and sustainably. That's why I think manually or mechanically propelled could be very broadly interpreted by people who would want to spearfish. And might be taken in a very open manner of how it would be done. You know what I mean?
So manually would be obviously more with flippers, that type of thing, I would think.
I interpret that as the tool used to shoot the fish.
Oh,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
Yeah, the
Okay.
propulsion tool of the spear or spear gun.
Got it.
Maybe a better, more specific definition, allowing a pneumatic gun, a band-powered gun, or hand spear, Hawaiian sling. There's different styles. Just manually or mechanically, I mean, you could really go pretty far out in what that would allow.
Right.
Which would not be sustainable.
So, okay.
There's a couple of folks online that want to weigh in.
Sure.
Osama, you want to add to the conversation?
Yeah, so with the debate as to whether scuba or free dive only type deal, if this is a goal of your guys's in allowing us to do this to remove or reduce invasive and unwanted species from waterways, I don't think that really needs to be debated. I think that either way works. Free diving does add a level of complexity to it. And a lot of places that outlaw the scuba diving for spearfishing are people that are like hunting tuna and big water species and that kind of stuff, just to keep those numbers of harvest down. But with this being a goal of reducing numbers in waterways, it shouldn't be an issue. And then in terms of manually or mechanically, like they were saying, there's pole spears, which are propelled by a rubber band, a piece of latex, and there's pneumatic spear guns, and there's band-driven spear guns, which both or all three, I guess, would be essentially controlled manually, but the spear is mechanically propelled. So I do think, I guess a manually propelled spear would be like you're throwing something underwater, which I just don't think physically would work that well. So that might, I don't know how to change that wording, but in terms of free diving or scuba, to reach the goal that you guys are proposing, it should be either way.
Got it. Thanks, Mohammed. We're going to move on to Nathan.
So kind of to build off of his comments, I think for the sake of clarity, diver needs to be defined. That way, if diver is defined, that gives strength to requiring the fisherman to be underwater in order to do this, as opposed to spearing fish, as in standing from the shore or standing in water and trying to spear fish from above the surface of the water. And then I guess as far as manually or mechanically driven spears, I don't know that necessarily needs to be split out, because the entire purpose is to reduce overpopulation of certain species of fish. So I think that would be helpful in making sure that folks aren't trying to spearfish, quote unquote, from above water, as in trying to like gig fish the way you would gig bullfrogs, for example, and making sure that they're actually somebody in the water. But as far as the rest of the requirements go, I'm sure we'll get into it more. But to me, a fishing license and a dive flag is all they really need to have.
Thanks, Nathan. Kyle, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. As a transplant from the Midwest originally, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up spearfishing through the ice. I don't know if that has been part of the discussion at all. I know we don't get super great ice all the time on some of these waters up north, but some of them could be conducive to spearing pike through the ice as well. Not sure if that's been thought of or is even reasonable to bring up, but I couldn't help to bring it up, I guess, just as a thought.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. That has been something that has been discussed, which is partially why when we're looking at definitions, we look at what is possible out there that potentially could be something under commission authority at a later time. So we don't have to go back and change rule again if something new comes up. So I guess that's probably just a good statement for everybody to understand when we have more broad scope in a definition, especially. Part of that is for other expansive reasons. I don't know if you want to say any more on that or not, Kathleen, but
Once everybody has gone through.
Any other comments on the definition? One thing that was briefly mentioned that we have not included is use of a dive flag. And that was something that most states had in rule, and that you had to have a dive flag and had to be within a certain distance of it. So I guess that's another question, whether that would need to be in rule, or that would go into commission proclamation, or whether that's a good idea. I don't know the answer. Whether it's a good idea is the question I think I'd like you guys to weigh in. Mechanically, how we go about incorporating it is the next question. Jeremy?
you're still on
All right.
mute, Jerry.
All right, thank you. I was trying to fix that. I'm working off my phone. Sorry about that. Yeah, as a freediving instructor, I'm a big proponent of safety and having some sort of dive flag, dive buoy out there, especially if we're around boats. That's the biggest concern that I have, is just having that visibility for craft on the water. That being said, when we're spearfishing on the coast, we don't typically have a big buoy or even a flag, but oftentimes a practice, at least in this part of the world, we'll have some sort of buoy that's connected to our dive line, that's connected to our spear gun or pole spear or something like that. So I would be careful about the wording we use, because if we say dive flag, then we have to have a dive flag, and sometimes that's not very conducive. But having some sort of identifying marker, identifying buoy, is encouraged and reasonable, I think.
Okay. Osama?
Hey, so I've personally been out at Lake Lowell with a 4-foot dive flag flying off of my boat while spearfishing carp. And I've had boats come within 75 feet of my boat, which per like boater safety, Coast Guard ruling, all that type stuff, it's 150-foot minimum. So it kind of opens up a can of worms that if we do require a dive flag, getting other boaters educated as to what a dive flag means and what rules should be followed around a dive flag. Like that's a whole different can of worms. But dive flags are great. And if you have one up and you're within 150 feet of it, you should be technically protected. But again, with the lack of knowledge in other boaters, they get curious, they want to see what it is. And I've had them, I mean, like I said, within 75 feet of me underwater, which doesn't seem that close, but it's very eerie when I'm watching their hull go over the top.
Got it.
So I 100% agree with what they're saying about with dive flags. So here's an example. You go up to Lucky Peak. We have a spot right there where you can go swimming. Right there, it's about a 30-foot easily drop right there, so we can get down below the water into a safe manner. The thing is, if you're coming on up to the surface, if you're surface swimming, that's when you'd really want to have a dive flag. It's for safety with boats, and just like what he's saying here in Idaho, I have a boating license because I go into Oregon. But that's one thing that's going to open up a whole other thing for requiring boating license. Not for that, but that's a different subject. We've had it where boaters will even come into the swimming area. I've had that go right over the top of my tanks, and I had the where it'll even be marked off. People just don't know what these flags are. I've been down to 100 feet doing one of my testings, and someone up on the surface saw a flag, and they started pulling it on up. And you're 100 feet down, I can't go straight on up, so you just have to let go of your spool. So flags are good, and it's for personal, certain aspects where you'd want one, and I would not recommend to require it. It's a recommendation, that's something for safety, but that's not part of this, is a requirement for those flags. So just like what we said, it's based on certain aspects.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I spearfish a lot in rivers, and that means you have to have a flag, which means a buoy, which means a rope attached to you. It's extremely dangerous in some aspects of the current. So I would find that very difficult to put my setup with a flag in a river.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a good point of like, please, be cognizant of boaters and use a flag, but as a law or a rule, I would be hesitant on that.
Justin, online?
Yeah, with the use of flags, I've used my flag over in Hell's Canyon a number of times when I was getting carp out there. And there are times when people are just curious and it brings them closer to you. But if we are able to maybe get something in the regulation books that, explain what a dive flag is and, the kind of the rules around it. I don't know if we need to maybe not necessarily adopt the Coast Guard rules because, sometimes we're in rivers that are narrower and that sort of thing as well. Obviously, we're not trying to dive in super swift water, but, obviously there's needs to be adjustments and understandings in how to go about it. It's one thing that I would say is we need to be also mindful of not necessarily saying the flag needs to be attached to the diver, but at least, within a reasonable distance from the diver. If we're gonna mandate having a flag, I think flags really help everyone be aware. I'm definitely not opposed to having a flag rule, but it does present a hazard to the diver if it is required to be connected to them at times, because there are times when you need to be able to ditch any sort of strings of ropes or spear guns or anything that you have in order to get out of a situation that could be hairy. And that also plays into, like, sometimes your spear gun will be rigged to your float. You'll have your float with, tied to a weight that you have in an area, and sometimes you use that weight and that float to mark an area where you saw fish earlier, and then you can circle back around and address it, you know, if you're flowing down with current or something like that. So those need to be taken into consideration when looking at the necessity of a dive flag and how to make rules around that.
Appreciate that. And we're not proposing at the moment to require dive flag. It's just an issue that's come up, and I wanted to make sure that
Right.
folks we're discussing it. So Nathan.
So after this conversation, I guess I wouldn't necessarily be a proponent of requiring the dive flag either. I certainly would like to see them used in a safe manner. But at the same time, that's really got me thinking about just how much boater education Idaho does not have. I mean, we require a license for archery hunting, separate from a hunting license. We require a trapper education license. We require a driver's license, but we don't require any type of boating license. And not saying we need to go that way with things either, but certainly there's enough issues currently with boater interactions with other boaters and with fishermen on the shore that putting divers into the mix of things, of having potentially even more conflict. It makes sense to me that boaters need to be instructed on how to do things safely, because the other users are also trying to do things safely, but folks on shore are fishing on shore for a reason. They don't need to be getting waked by wake boats. Kids in swimming areas don't need to have their tubes flipped over by boats going by too close. Like, all of those are things that are caused by boaters. So when it comes to spearfishing and trying to do it safely, obviously spearfishermen are going to do it as safe as they possibly can, but their biggest potential conflict is by boaters that just haven't been educated.
Got it.
And this is Kathleen Trevor, the lawyer advising Fish and Game for the state. One area as we go through this, it's one of those situations where different agencies have different authorities. Fish and Game is able to regulate the people who are taking fish, but a different agency, Parks and Recreation, and the Sheriff's Association, or sheriffs have, and counties have the authorities to regulate watercraft unrelated to the take of fish. So there's limitations on what Fish and Game could do in rules, while Fish and Game could require the spear fishing activity to use a dive flag. Fish and Game cannot then add the corollary for here's what boaters must do around the flag. So it's helpful to look at those two things.
Yeah, appreciate the clarification, Kathleen.
And if I might, while I momentarily have the mic, there's been one or two comments related to where the person doing the activity is. So the rule prohibition, and Lance, I don't know if you can scroll down to a couple of pages, maybe.
Which section?
It would be the definitions of 200 for fishing methods and gear. I think we might want to
down to 200.
Yeah, 200.02.
That's where we're headed next.
Yeah, well, I'm going to just head there for a moment to do that O2 piece. So just a little bit more.
So this is section
200.02. Keep
200.
Yep.
02.
Okay. Yes. So, and I wanted to focus here so that when we go back to the definition, when people were mentioning where the person is, this may be clarity so that spearing is by use of a spear wherever the person is, or something along those lines, versus the focus of this rule allowance is to a diver who is underwater. The main thing is the person doing the activity is underwater. I wanted to make sure that when we start talking about ice fishing, I don't think that means someone is under the ice versus someone over the hole using a spear. So that's why some of the input that is coming in, it sounds like we either want to say, be clear that the diver who is underwater or the person who is underwater
You can say person.
versus spearing, which whatever terminology we want to use, we still want to keep the use of a spear. It's allowed for taking of unprotected fish as long as there's an open season, but spearing of game fish would only be allowed for people who are underwater under what the department is proposing.
Correct.
So if we can go back up to the spearfishing, just to make sure, to help you all make sure I'm understanding the comments as they have been presented, is bow fishing is using a bow and arrow, spearfishing is, and if we say the diver who is underwater, or even you could say person who is underwater, if that's the main thing, so you don't have to figure out what a dive means.
Exactly.
If it's just someone, anybody who's underwater, whether they're holding their breath, supplied air, as long as they're underwater, and then they're using the manually or mechanically propelled, and how many prongs can come up, how many prongs are appropriate, etc. But I think if we have spearfishing as the person who is underwater and figure out if we need to say spearing's using a spear regardless of where you are, we might want to come back to that. Just as you all have talked, it has helped me try to draw some distinctions for what people are proposing to do.
Got it. So to Kathleen's point, the section, so the definition section, we've spent a lot of time talking about. The other piece that needs to be updated procedurally is this section in 200, which talks about all the restrictions or things that are unlawful to do. And so the proposition is by adding game fish may be taken by spearfishing as authorized by commission proclamation. So once we iron out the spearfishing definition and how that works with being underwater, then adding game fish and specifically commission proclamation into this section of rule then allows the commission to initiate season setting and bag limits on this activity, just like any other fishery in the state.
So I don't mean to sound pedantic by this, but I think in using that word, I do. Should that read taken by spearfishing only? Because
If I might interject, Osama, so the way proclamations work by, those are the things with the fish on the cover that look like little magazines.
yeah.
So you don't want to say game fish may be taken only by spearfishing. Is I don't envision the commission having a season only for spearfishing.
Right. No, not taken only by spearfishing, but by spearfishing only as authorized by commission proclamation.
So the way that the rules work is it's prohibited unless the commission authorizes it.
Okay.
So I think we're okay. I understand and appreciate you're saying, hey, you can only do this activity, but this allows that. And the commission proclamation, because that sets the length of season, the number of fish, the species of fish, the size of fish. This sentence would allow the season setting process to identify the geography, whether that's a lake, a section of river. It would allow the length of the season, might correspond to other game fish seasons, might be narrower, might be longer. And it would allow designating particular species of fish. So for example, if I arbitrarily picked a fishing season on Lake Pend Oreille for walleye, that would mean spearfishing would be allowed for walleye, but not for other species of game fish. So this sentence is just giving the commission the allowance to include those types of species, limits, timeframes, locations in the proclamation.
Okay.
All right, Nathan, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I guess the way I'm interpreting this is that the use of these snagging, bow fishing, and spearfishing for unprotected fish, but then game fish would only be permitted by spearfishing by commission rule. So would that mean that the other ones would not be the other methods would not be permissible by commission rule?
So what those four methods, using spears, using snags, bow fishing, is not allowed for game fish. It is allowed for unprotected fish like carp, as long as there's an open season, but not for game fish. What this proposal is, to coming back to Osama's use of the word only, this would allow game fish to be taken by spearfishing where and how the commission authorized it. So the other methods, including spearing from above water or ice fishing, snagging, would not otherwise be allowed for game fish, while they are allowed for unprotected fish.
Yeah, it's a bit of an odd phrasing, because this is the exception to the unlawful activity, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree. It is kind of an odd phrase, because when I'm reading through it, it almost makes it seem like spearfishing for non-game fish is also being excluded.
So this is actually, everything in black is the current rule. The stuff that we're proposing to modify is the red. So what we've been all operating under, spearfishing for carp in Lake Lowell or suckers in the river, that is currently allowed by the black letter, the sentence in black, before I started adding the red to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that part, but
Okay.
for some reason, as I'm reading through it and then adding in the proposed language, it's making me think that spearfishing for non-game fish is not permitted unless authorized by the commission, but the black language that's already there is negating that.
Yeah, and that's why when you all started talking, the nuances of what spearfishing by the underwater person means, if you look at the current allowance, that's where it says use of snagging, bow and arrow, crossbow, spear. So the spear is allowed by anybody, whether they are underwater or not, for taking unprotected fish in seasons open for game fish.
So question for Kathleen, do you think it's worth adding spear fishing, or is spear and mechanical device sufficiently
At this point, I
covering
probably
what
would
we're-
just make a separate category for the two. So that if you're snagging, bow fishing, spearing, wherever you are, that would be allowed for unprotected fish. And then to have, maybe break it into an A and a B, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because I can see how it can be confusing, and have the separate, here's what, the only thing where these tools are allowed for game fish is for spear fishing, where and how the commission has authorized it. So just
Got it. Okay. And we'll
figuring
make a
out how
note
to
of
break
that.
that into two, but just making sure we get the differences from you all. If back to the very broad definition, and our people have mentioned manual or mechanical, is that breadth, the reasonable breadth to have. Mechanical can include rubber bands, pneumatics, anything, versus having some other narrower class of activity.
Yeah, and just to be clear, like, we're not proposing to monkey with anything that's currently allowed. All we're attempting to do is create a very clear, understandable definition of spearfishing, provide the commission the authority to set seasons, limits, etc. And that's what we're trying to clear up. So, and as a process check, between now and when this modified rule goes to the commission in July, we will edit on it and get it tightened up and run it through a few editorials to make sure that the intent is clear with what we're talking about here. Not sure who was first. Dustin, you want to have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one of the reasons that it makes sense to have this language specifically say, you know, that they may be authorized taking by spearfishing and maybe not necessarily the other ones, is just because we are in the water and we can identify and see the fish better usually than people who are up above, either, you know, trying to gig or otherwise take them in some other ways. So as it is, I just wanted to say that I like the language of it as it stands in this section.
Okay, appreciate that. Dustin, comment?
That was me that just spoke.
Oh, who did then I missed somebody. Nathan, okay. Any other, did we miss anything, Kathleen?
There's some
Amber?
procedural things that we'll sweep on. Yep.
Any other, so I guess, does anybody have final comments? Dustin, your hand's up.
No, I just appreciate the time to go through it and to be able to give our input, and appreciate the process and see how we can help manage the even the game fish that are getting into waters that we don't want them as a state. I look forward to the opportunity to be able to, you know, take some fish to feed my family, but also do it within the legal bounds and not have to be, you know, questioning myself as to why is it that I can't help Idaho Fish and Game deal with this problem of game fish in waters they don't want game fish specifically, and sitting there just rubbing my head, yeah, and wondering why.
Thanks, Dustin. Jeremy?
Yeah, I just want to say, and forgive me, I don't want to over dramatize this, but I just feel like that spearfishermen have been kind of marginalized from this fishing regulations in multiple states, not just Idaho. So I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this. I truly, honestly believe, and Dustin and I have talked, and a few others there and here online have talked. We spearfishermen have a better opportunity to act as allies to the fish and game, to identify species before we take the shot, to be a part of the process, to get underwater and see what's happening, whereas maybe you know, the rest of you aren't getting to that level. So I look forward to being partners in this process and opening this up so that we can enjoy these waters like a traditional hunter, but also to kind of help with the sustainability of it. I'm a firm believer that if you want to keep this beautiful place around, then we have to take care of it, and this gives us the opportunity to do both. So thank you.
Appreciate the comments. Kyle?
Yeah, just a quick question. I can't help but think, if we're looking at this to try to reduce undesirable game fish numbers in certain areas, why we're limiting to only underwater spearfishing, I guess, or is that still open for like discussion at this point? So I don't know. Just with that previous section being specific to underwater, are we just keeping above water, I guess, spearing off the table at that point, or what does that look like?
Well, so this particular rulemaking in how government works so that people have notice and opportunity, the fishing rules got looked at as a whole and just went into effect July 1. So there was a big overview of fishing rules, and the petition or request for rulemaking at this point, although I appreciate the broader picture, was relative to the spearfishing activity. And in terms of people commenting, etc., it's reasonable to come take that up in a broader forum, so that when you go in and say we're talking about one activity and then it becomes 8, then people have to have the opportunity to weigh in on that. Fish and Game has, for this rulemaking, focused on one particular activity. So that's why can always come back and look at other things, but this administrative process is for the one activity.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I just wasn't sure how that the mechanics of that with they're both spearing, but one, yeah. So thanks for clearing that up.
That's where I started saying, oh, spearing versus what the choice of calling the underwater activity is spearfishing, and that's when people will start making fun of the lawyers, and it's like, well, it's kind of you guys too. So we'll try to sort out to separate the activities.
Well, you guys have in the room,
and then you have some.
It's only well, it'll be for another meeting on game fish that do not have bag limits, but this right now is just for spearfishing and opening up that door.
yes.
And then, so we want to stay right on task for what we're looking at and just move on ahead and keep trying to work together.
Okay, appreciate that. Osama, comment?
I wanted to thank you guys for taking the opportunity to actually take a look at this and take a serious look at it and work to changing these rules. I know that right now in its infancy, we're looking at like getting rid of unwanted populations. I know like Lake Lowell has an introduced walleye population. I know Pend Oreille has issues with, too many lake trout and pike and walleye and whatnot. And then I think that I just heard mention of like unprotected game fish. Is that something that the commission may be willing to look at in the future? Things like spearing crappie or opening up other reservoirs, say like, Salmon Falls Creek would be a tough one, but for different species of game fish.
Yeah, that's not an issue. So we haven't gotten to the process yet of engaging the commission on what they are interested and comfortable with expanding this activity to. So
right.
The direction and the conversations that were started with the commission were get the rules updated so that this becomes an allowable topic, and then we go to the next arena.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Is there going to be any reporting system that you guys are going to set in place, or that you guys may want to set in place, to see what numbers are taken by spear fishermen? That way we can kind of have a gauge to potentially show numbers to the commission later if we do want to expand that arena.
So that would require an entirely separate rule making. Does commission have a rule, or is that code?
Maybe not a requirement, but like a suggestion, like, hey, if you guys do engage in this activity, would you mind helping us with numbers?
Yeah, so there's always opportunity for voluntary, to set up voluntary reporting, like, and if it's beneficial to the participants, we can certainly have that conversation when we get there. But from a requirement standpoint, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. There's just and it's weird. There's a guy I follow on Instagram that actually got Lake Michigan opened up for walleye, pike, that type stuff. And with the numbers reporting system that they did there, that way their Game and Fish Commission can look at those numbers and see like, oh, hey, you guys are actually doing way more damage than we thought you were going to, or you guys are actually helping show some decline.
Right. That's a certainly a conversation we can keep going.
And just in terms of the time, one area to just recap, Lance, if you could go back to the
Reshare.
language. And one area on the dive flag issue, what I wanted to make sure I heard was that general feedback is at this time that would be a voluntary educational measure and not a requirement for buoy, dive flag, etc. I just wanted to make sure I'm hearing that correctly. Does anyone think that should be a requirement for fishing?
Nathan?
Yes, that would be an educational tool, voluntary use, not a requirement,
Great, thank you.
at
Jeremy?
least at this time.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Still trying to unmute. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would advocate that it's an encouraged practice, but not mandated, because I think a lot of us have either first or secondhand stories of putting a dive flag up and have it becoming dangerous because, you know, the discourse about boaters that was mentioned before. And along that line, knowing full well that you have no sway over boaters, because that's a completely different department. But the hope is that you know someone and we can start the communication process.
And that's where the process the department has is its ability to have information in the fishing brochure that doesn't reach all boaters, but can
Yeah,
at least.
perfect. It's a start, and that's all we ask.
Thank you. Osama?
Just a quick question. I know that you mentioned that it's essentially county and parks and recs run. Do you guys have any information that maybe Lance could send out an email to as to who we would get a hold of, countywide or statewide, that we may start pushing for legislation of, you know, the simple, it's like a free 10-hour motor safety course if you go by their time limits.
Osama, that is something the department is sensitive to pushing anyone towards a particular outcome for another agency. You have legislators that you can talk to about your particular issues, but the department can share who the safe boating contacts are, but is sensitive. We wouldn't want that to come across as the department is telling you to talk to these people about boating safety, just as we wouldn't want them to come and.
Yep, no, that makes sense.
So you do have legislators. You can look them up on the internet or find that in idaho.gov legislature or something like that. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And just to recap, because I have a 2 o'clock, I didn't embrace the passion of spearfishing fully. So to just recap back to we'll start here. So for the methods of take, we'll try to clarify spearing and spearfishing as well as that the spearfishing activity is for the person who is underwater and manual or mechanical means. And then the other one, got backwards. So this is spearfishing. we would just, person while underwater with the aid of mechanically, the department may consider having a separate definition for spearing, so there is clarity. And we had bow fishing, and then the O2 language was just to distinguish that spearing, including spearfishing, as well as people outside the water, would be allowed for unprotected fish. And then the allowance for this rulemaking is that game fish could be taken where the commission authorizes it by proclamation by spearfishing. I got a little bit of word salad there, but something where the spearfishing activity could be authorized for game fish in addition to unprotected fish.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I do see, so we have 6 minutes before we have to wrap up. I'm going to respect everybody's time. I do want to close with the process, so I'll get there in a moment. I do understand a gentleman, Dennis, showed up. Dennis, can you identify yourself real quick, please?
Unmute. How about now? You got me?
Yep,
Gotcha.
Yep. Sorry about that. My name's Dennis Hostler. I live in Bonner County, Sandpoint. I am a multi-decade spear fisherman, free diver, competitor, and I'm absolutely in favor of seeing if we can make some changes up here to allow us to take some of the game fish that are invasive and causing grief on some of the indigenous species. What else would you like to know about me?
I think that's great. So we just gave you the recap, and I'll just give you a quick opportunity, if you've got a screen in front of you, to kind of take a look at what we've got there that we've already kind of vetted through, but that's what we'll be proposing most likely, or something in a form very close to this to the commission.
Okay. Oh, I see. Are you? Yeah, there you go.
So as a very brief recap, what we are modifying is the rules governing fish, and the proposal, which we've discussed with the participants who were on a little bit earlier than you, were basically just, we need a definition of spearfishing. We don't want to be too restrictive. And so we wanted to clearly define the activity to allow it to proceed. This is where we're starting from. There might be a little bit of noodling, but we haven't really come to any additional restrictive language. This is kind of gathering the general ballpark of what people are interested in doing, and clarifying what the activity actually is.
Got it. So that looks pretty clean. I mean, simple and inclusive. It doesn't look like
that's what we're going for.
Yep.
And then the other section that needs to be modified to then give the commission allowance to set seasons and harvest limits and open waters is down here under 200.02. And it's a little bit of an odd way to read, because these activities are all unlawful except for these exceptions. And so the current exceptions, which are in the black language, allow snagging, bow and arrow, crossbow, spear, etc., for taking unprotected fish. So those are carp, suckers, that sort of thing, and that's currently legal. The proposal we're making is to actually set the definition of spearfishing apart from bow fishing, and add a provision that then gives the commission authority to set a season or limit on game fish by proclamation, which is basically the fishing seasons and rules booklet that they do on a triennial basis, but we will work with the commission to get that done before July 1 of next year. Got
it. So the game fish, are you specific about certain, or are you going to put all the game fish in there? What's the intent or idea on that?
So the original petition was really focusing on those game fish species that the department is actively managing against. So in Pond A, looking at walleye, possibly lake trout, those were the species that were brought forth in the commission meeting and in the petition. Honestly, we haven't started that conversation with the commission yet in terms of what their comfort level is, or with department staff in terms of comfort level for other game fish. So it's fairly cut and dried when you're talking about species that we're actively trying to remove. I don't think the commission is going to have any heartburn in that arena.
Got it. Are pike included in that?
Pike are we're in a little bit of an odd place with pike on like Coeur d'Alene Lake, because we're managing them as a game fish. The Coeur d'Alene tribe is managing them for removal. I don't know, and I believe I'm not as familiar with pike abundance in Pond A, but Andy Ducks was on the phone. Anyway, it's not, we're not quite at that point in the process yet. We just have to get the rules set up to allow it, and then we'll have that conversation down the road.
Got it. I appreciate you giving me that. What else?
All right.
And we've also got someone else who joined, Joe Lovelace. Can you let us know if you're affiliated with anybody, or if it's just you as your personal?
Yeah, my name's Joe. I'm just grew up in Idaho, and I was writing an email. I was only able to join just now, but I lived in Salt Lake for the last few years and got to do a whole bunch of spearfishing down there. It looks like you all have been talking about spearfishing a bit during this this particular talk, but Utah has a really cool, a really well established setup for seasons and everything in terms of avoiding harassing fish during mating season and things like that. And it seems like they do a really good job of regulating, slot limit and things like that for various different fish. I grew up fly fishing and spin casting in Idaho, and I completely switched over to spearfishing the last few years because it's just so much more fun of a way to see fish.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Joe.
And so for the sake of time, we're at 2:01, so I'm going to wrap us up here. I will put this out there that we are in the 21-day public comment period, so we still have the opportunity for anybody to submit comments. Please do that through our rules inbox, which is rules@idfg.idaho.gov. And also, Lance does have a list of most of your emails, I believe. So if there's somebody that has not given your email to Lance, go ahead and send that email to that rules inbox if you want to be included in any sort of notifications around the next steps. As far as the next steps and what this process looks like over the next year, is this meeting starts the process for us to put together the proposed rule. So once we vet all the comments that we got from all of you and put together a nice little package, we'll put it in front of the commission. The commission will vote on it for proposed rule making going into adopted. That has to be approved through the governor's office and the Division of Financial Management with the governor's office. Once that's approved, it goes into the administrative bulletin where it's published there. And then the next step is we put the final rule to the commission at that point in time in November, and that goes pending. And once it's pending, it goes to the legislature. The legislature has their opportunity to weigh in on it for review in January, February timeframe. And then if they decide to adopt it, it will go into effect July of 2025, July 1 of 2025. So that's the process. It's a long process. It's a process we have to adhere to.
And
But
that's the correct
stages.
That's the correct rules.
Rules@idfg.idaho.gov. Yeah, Lance is putting in the chat real quick what the inbox is if you don't have it for comments. So we'll be watching that comment box. So even if we don't have all the comments before the commission meeting, we have a proposed rule, we have an opportunity within that time period before we bring a pending rule to modify it just a little bit based on logical outgrowth. So if we still receive comments that are very relevant to what we're doing in the same tone as what we're doing, then we can integrate those as well before the rule goes pending. So if anybody else has any questions, now's a quick opportunity. I'm going to give you 1 minute and then we're going to shut this down, and thank you very much for attending. Really appreciate it.
I do.
Yeah,
Dennis.
the email's in the chat box.
So quick question on the commission and the legislation. Does the legislation usually follow the commission's recommendations?
I'm
just curious.
I would say generally, I would not say usually.
Got it.
So it really depends, honestly, it really depends. Oftentimes in this situation, there's a lot of constituents that actually support it. And if you have legislators that are in your area that you're in touch with, that's the best opportunity at that point in time, is to say, hey, this rule is going to be in front of you guys. We really support it. So that's the best way to do it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, with that, I think, thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon, and we will wrap up and email the rules, or for those of you that are on the email distribution list, I'll give you an update as the process moves forward.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.